Welcome to the Right Hand Roadmap, the podcast for seconds in command of founder-led companies. I'm your host, Megan Long, owner of Second First. In each episode, we show you the path to success on your journey as the #2 leader in entrepreneurial companies. I am so happy you are here. I have a quick favor to ask of you. If there's a recent episode that stood out to you or that you got value from, would you please share it with either a friend, a coworker, or someone that might find it valuable? Today, though, you and I are chatting about a topic I know a lot about. I am an S-tier expert at this, and that topic is mistakes. Not just mistakes, but making mistakes as a second in command, which is actually one of the fastest paths to growth there is. And let me tell you where all this came from. There's a one-on-one coaching client that has been encouraging his leadership team to adopt AI in their daily work. Great. However, there's a manager that reports to him that has outsourced almost all of their thinking and decision-making to ChatGPT. And this COO, my coaching client, and I were talking about how if this manager continues on this track, they likely won't be viewed as promotable. They're unable to be strategic, and they're not giving themselves chances to develop that muscle. And stepping back to think about, okay, well, how does one develop that muscle? It's really like any other muscle. It comes down to reps. And those reps, I think, can be distilled down to mistakes. When you make mistakes, it's data, it's learning, it's understanding. And when AI makes mistakes, you don't have that decision tree to reflect back on and say, okay, this is what I'll change next time. We have a training in our framework called Decoding the Entrepreneur. So understanding the mindset of and how to communicate with entrepreneurs. And in that training, we discuss how most entrepreneurs view failure differently than the rest of us. Many entrepreneurs actually depend on various degrees of failure. Trying and failing is how you learn what works and what doesn't work. It's not always viewed as negative. It can be viewed as positive because even if you fail, it means you're making progress. As the second in command, your job is to help your CEO understand the possible outcomes and consequences to allow them to make informed decisions to mitigate the impact of that possible failure. Okay. You, though, if you are a second in command, if you are in a leadership role, an operator, you didn't get there because you failed all along your career. You weren't allowed, either by yourself or others, to make mistakes out loud. You're likely a high performer. Maybe you're like me and other millennials that were labeled gifted at some point in school, and you've had to live up to that the rest of your life. If we want to go all the way back, I came home with my report card one time, back when they were cardboard and came in manila envelopes, and I had gotten my first A-. I was so scared of that failure, which, yes, an A- to me was failure, that I took a ballpoint pen and made a tiny vertical line to turn the minus into a plus sign before I showed my parents. Of course, then I had gnawing guilt and used liquid whiteout to change it back almost immediately. But this is an example of how most of us feel about failure, about mistakes. I actually want you to think of mistakes like a tax that you pay on your way to growth, to being better at your role. Now, if you're brand new to the position, or you are like a new hire to the company, you do have less margin for error because you are still proving yourself and you don't have an established personal brand there yet. There's another earlier episode we have on how to nail your first 90 days. I would refer back to that. But for those of you that are established or have been promoted from within, you have room to be riskier. Here's what I learned the hard way. I thought I had to be a membrane for my entrepreneur to keep bad news from bubbling up to them. That wasn't true and got me into trouble a few times. I also saw other folks get terminated for their failures. So I had some cognitive dissonance around what was acceptable for me in my role as a COO and integrator. I made mistakes. I even made some mistakes that, if I'm being completely honest, I may have fired myself for. And I had certainly seen others get fired for less. So why wasn't I? And why wasn't my CEO even really mad without just directly asking? Because that sounds like a terrifyingly uncomfortable conversation that I don't want to have. I'd boil it down to today's theme. I learned from each and every mistake and failure. I owned every mistake and failure. If I caused a problem, I would hit a few immediate questions. First, can I fix this and how? 2, how did this happen? Not just I wasn't thinking, and also not a thorough justification of why I made my choices, because I wasn't trying to defend it. I was trying to explain it. So just a practical postmortem of what happened. And both of those are what I would hit my CEO with. He'd usually have follow-up questions, but 2 of our core values were humility and vulnerability. So that's what I led with. If I couldn't answer those 2 questions, if I couldn't figure out those 2 things, maybe I didn't have enough experience to actually analyze what happened, that's where I could get stuck. And I always should have brought it to my CEO sooner than I did. First, because entrepreneurs are so used to bad news, they're anesthetized to it. There was never a bad reaction directed at me. It very much felt like we were in it together. And if he didn't have the answer, which now as an entrepreneur myself, I can tell you, we don't know what we're doing either, but he had the network that I didn't. So he knew exactly who to call to fix it or to get great advice. For example, there was a banking issue I got us into early in my tenure, and he connected me with a banker to sit down and do training with me. So on the other side of mistakes and failure, there may even be facilitated learning and growth that happens. Here's another consideration. We already talked about this pressure that you feel because of your history to be perfect, to not make mistakes. When you present as perfect, you're setting the culture for those that report to you. And that's a whole other topic in itself, that there's the company culture, but then there's the culture of your team. And that has to be intentional. We'll talk about that some other time. But when you're resistant to your own mistakes, that's the expectation you're setting for your team. And it creates a bottleneck. If your team is fearful of failure, if they're scared to make moves and mess up, they'll bring everything to you for confirmation. A lot of people that are high detail personalities have this tendency naturally. I guarantee you have folks on your team that are like this, that they don't want full ownership if they can't have every fact, if they can't get all of their ducks in the row, if they don't have every piece of information. So you'll deal with that regardless, because that's just who they are. But if everyone on your team is asking you for the final decision, it slows work down and ironically puts extra pressure on you to get everything right. So it becomes this like self-fulfilling stress cycle. So my challenge to you in the next month is to be more open with your mistakes and more vulnerable with your entrepreneur and more vulnerable with your team. And I truly believe you will grow and it'll inspire those that report to you. To find show notes and links for anything mentioned in this episode, visit secondfirst.com/61. Be sure to subscribe to catch future episodes and leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on. And remember, you don't have to navigate being a second in command alone when you have the right hand roadmap.